Hey, bird watchers! In this episode, we explore why localization teams must evolve from optimizing isolated translation steps toward orchestrating entire multilingual operating models. I'm joined by industry vet and solutions connoisseur Erik Vogt to discuss fragmentation caused by modern tool stacks, the growing importance of interoperability and feedback loops, and how solutions architects increasingly act as systems designers across functions. Today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to. Erik, you've spent more than 25 years in this industry. I've around 22, 23. There's been a lot of overlap, but it wasn't until I'd say last year or so that we really started interacting. We did a webinar together. We did Lockworld. I even sat in the presentation you did at Lockworld in Monterey, and a couple weeks ago we got to hang out and go to Global Sake together. So this is awesome. I'm glad to thank you for joining the podcast.
It's great to connect with a kindred spirit in this space. I mean, we tend to both be design thinkers or systems thinkers, and so it's a lot of fun to trade ideas.
Yeah, no, it's again you've I'm always impressed by when it's not like going through your resume, but like kind of going through all the things that you've been able to do and experience in your career. It's awesome to I like to surround myself with people that have experiences that I don't have because that's how you kind of learn and that's how you evolve. As a constant learner myself, I'm always looking towards people around me to say it's like, wow, what have you been up to? So I can kind of pick your brain and I can learn more. And I mean, you've done a lot. I mean, it's localization testing, AI data operations. Now you're consulting, so you're back into kind of like the consulting gig. And I guess my question to you is, over the 25 years, like what patterns have remained surprisingly consistent from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones is that business is business, right? And so the math about balance sheets and the mechanics of margin and the mechanics of investment haven't changed at all. Like those are all exactly the same. And the world has changed. I mean, cultural expectations for technology has changed. The tools have changed. Interestingly enough, the turnover of clients that I had 25 years ago when I got started, there's very few of them that still exist today. Like a lot of them have completely transformed, or they've gone out of business entirely, or been absorbed by somebody else. But the industry is kind of the supply side is the supplier side. When you think about the language services industry or SaaS providers, they have kind of clicked into similar roles. And I basically boil them down into some basic, simple kind of groups. And one of them is the labor arbitrage. When you think about labor arbitrage, I remember Rory Cowan, the former CEO of Linebridge, had a thing at one point where he was talking about this global mobile worker. Like he was just sort of obsessed with this idea, and he thought about Starbucks has kind of gone from being a coffee provider to being a meeting place for this global mobile worker. And they're providing internet, and they provide places to sit down, and there's like a meeting place. And yeah, they also sell coffee, but the core value proposition is like you're creating a meeting hub. And sales leaders use this all the time as kind of this neutral territory where they can meet people ad hoc without having to pay kind of a meeting overhead. Anyway, it's interesting that labor arbitrage as a business model, as opposed to the labor that's being done, is very consistent. You buy a bunch of units of time and you sell them at a higher marginal rate. And that is basically the same as it was in the early 90s.
You know, uh, I was at a conference, it was probably about a year ago, and I got into like the impetus of maybe not the starting point of where I got into solutioning, but really the mindset. And it was having transformers as a kid and like trying to figure out how they worked. Like keep converting them into and like how do these work? And I unfortunately broke a lot of my toys trying to take them apart, put them back together. But that was kind of my mindset of where I knew eventually I wanted to be into problem solving and solutioning. And I guess I have to ask you, what originally drew you into solutions, operational design versus, I mean, delivery and technology? Because they're Venn diagram overlap, but there are totally separate processes, you know?
They kind of are, but they're all interrelated. And so I started out as a localization engineer, and that was my very first job. In fact, I was a tech. I was a temporary tech even. I was just helping to resize dialog boxes and in iOS 2 of all things, which is again operating an obsolete capability. But and to case in point, I broke my toys too. So I had fun in my little tech world saying, hey, there needs to be a variable here for the Spanish todos and todas based on gender values. So I interjected lines of code into the code that was provided to the client and said, here, update your variable list because you need these two different variables for these two different use cases. And in this particular case, I got lucky because the engineer says, oh yeah, I can add a variable for that. In other cases, I broke things like I accidentally booted up a Chinese SQL server and because I was trying to do some testing on it. And of course, it just created a DNS conflict and nobody in the whole company could log in for a while and they didn't know why because I had broken it. But it's an interest in tinkering and kind of figuring out, well, I'll bet you that I can get a non-Unicode English server to display Chinese correctly if I break the byte order mark and force it to ingest the content as bytes and then reconstitute it on the other side by then labeling the correct code page. And I was able to render, Chinese correctly using a, pre-Unicode era servers. So I think to answer your question, why did Erik get involved with solutions? Well, the job was to be an engineer, and then later I was a program manager. I kind of managed PM teams, and then I also done pre-sales support as a formal solutions person. But I think I was doing solutions pretty much from the beginning because, as some people have put it, shadow solutions. Like if you just like to tinker and then you see how different systems fit together, this system over here needs this needs this. How can these things get out of their silos and look at a sum total of capabilities that is outside or beyond the scope design of each of those silos, right? And if you think in terms of silos and optimizing those silos, then you end up with a forest and a trees problem where you have something that works really well but doesn't deliver meaningful value. And that's kind of where I would almost say this is almost an artistic vision that an organization should be harmoniously aligned where the different systems actually are tuned to each other correctly. And that creates this virtuous feedback loop that the company thrives. And I've seen it happen. And I've also seen it how people dig in their heels and like, I'm doing my job and I'm doing my job, but those things aren't actually solving the problem together. So you end up with individual functions that are working great, but the organization as a whole doesn't thrive.
I think you just kind of summarized or kind of set the table for where I think the heart of this conversation is going as well. And I think for those of you who didn't know, Erik is working on a book. So you are working on a book, and we'll learn a little bit more about that throughout this conversation. I still want people to buy your book, so I don't want to talk about everything in it, but one of the core themes is that orchestration beats optimization. So again, without cannibalizing potential book sales for you, high level, what do you mean by that?
Well, my ambitions for making money on a book are very, very modest. Like I'd be very impressed if I sold like 5 books, but I think in real life, the orchestration is about balancing multiple functions together, whereas optimizations focuses on a KPI. And I'll give you some examples of kind of why some core lessons in this. One was this is back in long ago. I was working on this Microsoft project. Microsoft was a client, and cumulatively they had something like 50 KPIs, right? And it just struck me that there's something fundamentally wrong with the premise or the understanding of what a KPI is in this case, because anybody who understands what KPIs are knows that you can't have more than a few. You can't have 50 rudders on your ship. Like the rudder or the steering wheel is a KPI, or the speedometer is a KPI. Like you need to drive your function along these kind of core core variables that need to be adjusted constantly, and that's kind of what your success is measured by. You reach your destination, but the performance of individual subcomponents of this are often boil up to simply, do they meet or do they not meet a certain criteria? So again, I'm not drifting into dashboard methodology or mindset here, but an oil light doesn't need to be on. It doesn't need to be visible unless there's a problem. It can disappear from your view unless there's a problem. So when you're thinking about orchestration, you're thinking about, how do I get these multiple functions to work together to deliver a particular outcome without drowning in too many pseudo KPIs? How do you track so many different things here that are the wrong signal? There was another story that I like to tell about Silicon Graphics, another kind of obsolete company, but they used to be a big deal. And the story was that the Japanese team kept on saying that the translations were no good, and the Silicon Graphics kept on trying to go back and retranslate, and they're like, why are you never happy with our translations? And so finally, some execs flew over there and said, okay, show me exactly what's wrong. And they pointed to a totally different book that wasn't, the totally different manual that wasn't translated. And they said, this isn't translated. This is the problem. Like, it isn't that your translations were wrong, but they didn't translate the right content. So I think this is still incredibly important right now, that we might optimize per word rate, which I'm on record as complaining about quite a lot, because if you keep on working towards optimizing your per word rate, you're not optimizing towards the business value that the translation is actually delivering. And if you're having a conversation about a word rate, like, or a marginal, boost to word rate, with some transactional overhead, metrics like 10% PMP or whatever, you're still driving towards this kind of optimization of the wrong signal. What you actually want is your total cost of ownership to be manageable. You want the business impact to be more manageable. So if you're looking at, say, how much it costs per word versus how much does it cost per meaningful word or per impactful word or results, then you get very different results. So another lesson, just kind of meandering through these stories, is that we had this this case where we were looking at translations in the East Asian market, and we looked at how well do the translations work versus transcreation. So the hypothesis there was that transcreation is 4 times more expensive. So people rarely did it. They would usually translate. But then we looked at the actual shares, the clicks, views, and shares statistics, and then we divided the cost by the number of clicks and views and shares. And the translated content is shared so much less often, and viewed, like the clicks and likes and the basically end user engagement is so much less engaging that it turned out that per click, per intent, per the purpose of this stuff is to share and engage, it was cheaper to transcreate it because you got such better results from it. So again, it's kind of the forest for the trees problem. If you're focused on just optimizing your word rate and you fail to think about why you're trying to reach this global audience, and you don't tune your message accordingly to this global audience, then you're going to be very efficient at delivering a pointless product, like that nobody will read or nobody engages with.
Yeah, I think starting with purpose, starting with intent, and then working your way back from there is, I mean, that's where the KPIs need to start off with. If you're going to have any, it is like, what is the goal of this content? Sometimes it's to check a box, and we know that. Sometimes people are just like, I need to translate it to just check the box. But at least if you know that, then it's great. What can I then sacrifice in terms of maybe quality or formatting or these things that will probably drag things down if you're just checking a box, versus my goal is to increase views on something? Or I think that oftentimes, like, yeah, it is this focus on per word rate, and we could probably have a whole episode just on per word rate, but we won't. we won't go down that
Nobody
rabbit hole.
wants to beat that dead horse. We could talk all about why it's so hard to change it. that is actually a whole different, actual interesting conversation. But
yeah, but it is wild to see, like, I guess it's my subsequent question is, why do companies often mistake localized efficiency improvements for actual operational transformation? I think that this is, you started to talk into that in the last question, but I think we can really dive into that a little bit more here. Is I do think that there's oftentimes a misalignment of expectations on both sides of the people that are requesting the localized content or need the localized content and the people that are actually producing it. But what's your take on that?
Well, I cut my teeth on HP back in the day, and HP went through a transformation, and I'll give a call out to Allison Toon as one of the architects of that transformation. But basically, there was they do a lot of redundant stuff, like all these user manuals for printers and devices and scanners and all this stuff, and they would increment their user guides basically with some slightly improved features. Like there may or may not be a feature in a particular thing or whatever. But over the course of 10 years, I saw that I did this sort of was curious about the economics of the whole system. And I'd worked with them basically for seeing their evolution for about 10 years. And I saw that originally the cost per word, per printed word, right? So per delivered word was in the ballpark of like 20 cents per word. There's huge PM fees, there's huge engineering fees, there's a lot of retranslations of stuff. Very, very, very inefficient. 10 years later, that was, and this is already 15 years ago, right? So this is way before AI or even MT. We saw the total cost per printed word going down to about 2 cents per word. So that was by using content management systems really effectively. They built some amazing workflows to manage Delta effectively, so they could sort of use variables to update certain features. I had a writer who reported to me at one point, and I can't remember this day. He was so excited. He's like, I wrote an entire user guide without writing a single word, and he was just able to leverage everything in the CMS, just kind of finagle the variables a little bit. But what was happening was actually even more profound than that. Not just the content management as an excellent kind of structure, but they were shifting from separating content to how it's being deployed. And then they shifted the content structure from a user guide into an intent-based model so that you can engage with, I don't care about anything other than how to replace the printer cartridge. I don't want to download the manual and look it up in the index and then drive down to page 72 to figure out how to do this. I just want to find out the answer to my question right now. And so they were very early adopters of this intent-based way of thinking about things. So I'm using this example because HP was an early adopter of a broad perspective of what they were trying to achieve. They're used to be an engineering-based company, and they were very focused on building this deeper efficiency in terms of their overall output, right? Now, if they had been focused on optimizing per word rates, they would never have been able to achieve this. It took a strategic reorganization of the entire company and how they were thinking about content, how they were storing content, what went out to a user or a expert to review, and how to sort of incorporate that into their overall program. So I think that had a profound effect on me as I was thinking about like localization efficiency. If I have another reverse auction of trying to like figure out how I can squeeze another penny out of a standard rate that will apply to everything that we do, and meanwhile, procurement, I understand why they're doing it. Like to all the procurement people who might be watching this, I feel for you. You have a tough job to do. You have to quantify this somehow. But unfortunately, what unintentionally happens is the drive towards localization efficiency in sort of commoditized word rates ends up producing negative outcomes because if you're paying an expert to sort of look at this, you're no longer paying an expert, you're paying cheaper and cheaper resources, because remember, this is a labor arbitrage business. And then that just squeezes the expert out of the picture. And then you end up with these, substandard results that have unexpected costs later on down the line in higher support costs or higher infrastructure costs. So being smart, you can still reduce costs in a way that doesn't mean stripping value out of the easiest thing to attack, which is your outsource spend. And that's unfortunately, our industry tends to orient themselves a lot around that. So this is kind of why when we were talking about mistaking localization efficiency improvement for actual operational transformation, real operational transformation is looking at the core value proposition, building it back up and asking yourself, are the different stations or sets of activities in this workflow still delivering the value that we expect them to, and being willing to re-architect your workflows to address emerging and changing business realities that you're confronting. That is, I think, what we're talking about when we're talking about orchestration. That is the essence of it. That's the heart of it.
Yeah, a lot to dissect here. I'll just off the top of my head is one is I do think like especially modern content management systems and how it's evolved, allowing you to have pieces, content blocks, and things that you can then reassemble and repurpose and use in blogs or posts. And I think that has really unlocked a new possibility for localization teams to think about how they're even managing content with an end customer, as opposed to here's a website, you're translating a website. This is more along the lines of here's content that, this could be repurposed, this could be used here. And I think that's where, to your point of removing the experts, removing those people that could look at the process as a whole and say, hey, instead of translating all this content, even with your fuzzy matches, and again, in the conversation for another day, whatever it is there content that maybe it doesn't need to be localized, or maybe it could be go through a different process, or maybe it could be, repurposed over here, whatever it is, like looking at it as an operational efficiency that could ultimately save costs in the long run, as opposed to these short-term games of, yeah, we've reduced the per word rate. So I think that there's absolutely that. And then the other thing too that you touched on, thinking about content and modularizing it and putting into like little processes, I think that speaks to the heart of orchestration as well, because as much as you can kind of like take this larger process and shrink it into these modular things, as time, technology, whatever it is then you can take this piece out, swap in a new piece if you need to, and that's where orchestration becomes magical. Is like you're not stuck with legacy tech debt, or you're not stuck with a legacy process that maybe this piece of the process isn't working the way that it needs to, or maybe you get a new customer where that process won't work anyway and you need to like swap things out. So I think that's where the direction and where I'm seeing orchestration for localization. What about you? Like, what does a truly orchestrated multilingual operation look like to you?
I tend to think about it as branches of a tree, and the harder it is to build a process, the fewer limbs that tree has. But if you can generate iterations or different sort of input and output parameters, you can generate more possibilities. And the more possibilities you have, and importantly, the ability for discoverability and awareness, like your ability to make a process simply for the purposes of monitoring the performance of a particular outcome. It's all about signals. It's all about knowing what is making a difference and being able to iterate quickly to make those improvements. So I think when we're thinking about sort of thinking about the any given process, like there's risk, there's cost, there's time, there's a bunch of these fundamental dimensions of it. And I think often when pain happens, if somebody's having heartburn somewhere in the system, usually if you drill down to it, it comes from a misalignment of risk and outcome. Borrowing some sort of perspective of this based on capitalism and how stock markets work, generally your return should be higher if your risk is higher, right? So you should, if you're willing to take the higher risks, you could. And when that's hidden, when you have hidden the risks and you pretend like you're offering a low risk solution that's high, that is more secure, then you end up with something like the housing crisis of 2008, where the subprime mortgages kind of blew up, and you ended up with this snowball effect of a disaster waiting to happen. Yeah, you can tell I sort of think about multiple systems here. I mean, I think about economics a lot. I think about workflows a lot. But when you're thinking about truly orchestrated multilingual operations and what that looks like, it is about having different ability to create permutations quickly, measure not whether they're working, and fine tune the risk parameters, the cost parameters, and the time parameters for basically theoretically an infinite number of things. But keeping in mind, our legacy model is that everything that gets translated gets dumped into a TM, and that TM is trusted at a higher rate with all the fuzzy matches and all the other stuff that goes along with it. So the consequences of putting substandard stuff into a TM starts to become hugely expensive. Like the long-term cost of a bad TM is fixing the same issues over and over and over again. That is a bad business decision. So then if you think now let's get more specific. Let's look at the incremental value of fuzzy matches, for example. How would you measure whether or not your fuzzy matches are actually giving you any monetary value? You look at the actual performance. What if you just had AI or MT translating your 100% segments as best as they possibly can, get rid of all your fuzzy matches, and then you have your exact matches, which you're probably going to trust a little bit more, or even different model altogether. What if you have AI, MT translate and then transcreate everything? Because remember, transcreation might perform better in the first place, and then have an expert reviewing that transcreation as a workflow process, versus the traditional model of like a gazillion different lines of fuzzy matches and kind of fragmenting out the whole cost into extremely complex equations of what that's costs. And then you look at the end results, like how well did each of these workflows deliver value to the original intent? And being able to orchestrate starts having you ask those questions, not how you can renegotiate the range of a fuzzy match, because I've literally had procurement people saying, well, we want to redefine the fuzzy grid to, we want a couple points here and a couple points here, just shaving off these kind of tiny incremental benefits while never really thinking about the actual business impact of or cost of failure in this context, or really being able to effectively trial and error different workflows to see how those come out. There's only one workflow and you have to do it, and you sort of optimize that to death. That is actually why this time in this industry is so interesting. This is why this time in our industry is like this eye-opening time where we can start revisiting the fundamental value propositions of the why we're in this business to start with, and help shape offerings that are tightly aligned to that purpose, rather than sort of sticking with this legacy ecosystem.
And where do you see, this is a loaded question, but where do you see AI in all of this? I mean, because there's multiple opportunities to look at AI, and I think everyone just goes to AI translation, AI post-editing, quality estimation, but maybe it's not just that. Where do you see the whole bigger picture of AI and processes?
I believe that there is a market for AI improvement of translation. But then you think, what is the incremental value of a 5% improvement in translation quality, whatever that means, however you're measuring it? You're never going to get to high trust, because by definition, something that's not human reviewed won't be high trust. So then you're saying, how much will I price the statistical value of something that's incrementally a little better than what I had before with just raw MT or chained MT or configured MT, or all these things. So yes, there is a role for AI improved translations. And yes, there's a bunch of different pathways that you could explore with regards to how to optimize the outcome. And there's companies like that focus on that. That's like kind of their core way of thinking about it. Kind of mentioned Intento, like for example, that used to be their kind of core thing, was like, we'll give you the best available MT based on, what is it that we're translating type of question. It was cool idea. So I think the AI, I think though, there's so many more things happening at the same time, and that's why I say, yeah, you're going to get some better improvement in translation quality per se. But now you have the opportunity to start generating content instantly. You can generate content in market per a different persona than you had in English. Like if you look at your market demand for your product in a different country, and you're taking your English content and you're presuming that English content is perfect for this other market, except that it isn't translated into Turkish or whatever, then you're already making a big assumption about the English being the right answer to the Turkish market. And yet, for those of us who know some of the more sophisticated models out there, the Turkish market might be buying on a completely different sort of reasons for it. I was getting back to HP. I remember HP had this notion of kind of commercial versus residential printers, but what they didn't anticipate was that in low-cost regions, and thinking Uzbekistan in particular, because that was the example that was given to me, they were buying somebody was buying like a residential inkjet printer, and then sticking it in an office somewhere, and people were coming there and paying them a couple rubles or whatever to print a few pages or whatever. That market they didn't buy residential printers and just having them sitting in their house. They're turning this into a market. So you see that that use case is very different, and that the demands on those products are very different, and their way of thinking about how to market it is very different. So if you're trying to sell a bunch of printers versus trying to sort of make people aware that this printer, your local grocery store could have the printer and you're paying them to do the printing, it just fundamentally, it doesn't align. And so AI has the capability of finding signals about how those markets work. I mean, obviously you need experts as well. You need to collect data, but then you can shape your translation and your globalization strategy around using AI tools, both as a signal collector, a signal synthesizer, and as something that can generate content. And then your expert in loop is really there to look at the monolingual output potentially and say, how well does this monolingual output meet my particular market demands, instead of saying, how well does it meet the English source? So I think the whole globalization is cracking open here with a whole bunch of different tools, also that individuals can exercise on their own, that are outside of corporate control, the sort of shadow AI phenomenon, which is a very real thing. Lots of people, it's happening a lot more than people probably want to realize. So yeah, lots going on here, lots and lots and lots of moving parts, which is why when there's chaos, I will always emphasize, get back to why you're doing this, check your signals, are they still on track? And what do you want to build with all these new capabilities that you didn't already, that may be look very different if you redesign your organization to address these new tools, rather than thinking about optimizing the capabilities that you already had.
I think we've come full circle in the conversation. I think we're talking about the same thing earlier, but now we're just throwing AI into the mix too, is because it's these incremental gains versus looking at a holistic process and thinking about AI is picking up these signals, they're picking up context, they're picking up all of this stuff that could be injected in to create content or make decisions on which workflow the content even needs to go through. There's a lot of content that's being generated just to be reconsumed by AI for search engine optimization. Like, does that need to go through a full TEP process? No. And so I think like having your process define where AI best fits makes sense than just I'm gonna, do the traditional, just gonna throw AI to translate things. It might not even need to be translated. And that's also to the heart of the matter of, as we're removing the experts, we're removing the SMEs from the process, there's even more of a risk of actually translating stuff or working on stuff that costs increasing because no one's got the eyes on the entire program or managing this as a solution, and they're just looking at it as churn, 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 churn. And then that's, I think again, it speaks to the heart of what you're talking about. And I think also to the evolution of where solutions architects or solutions focused people in our industry are at today, or we need to be at today, because I do think that role has changed and continues to change. And so, what do you think about like the SA role today, and what the looking at designing flows across functions, and how does that look like in practice to you in regards to the evolution of the SA role today?
Well, I'm going to slightly answer. I'm going to answer a slightly different question first, and then I'll get to where the role is changing. The premise of my book is my operating title is Principles of Solutions Design, and my premise is not that I'm not writing this book for solutions architects. I'm writing this for people who want to solve problems, because there's a much bigger way of thinking about things that I think anybody can benefit from. And after one of my presentations, somebody said, well, I guess you're just trying to amplify the role of solutions architects. And I'm like, no, I want people to think like solutions architects. I want people to think more broadly about what they're trying to do and think more systems wise rather than like a narrow what's my job title tell me to do. So I think from the standpoint of my passion and what I love, kind of what I want to share with the world with this, is that solutions design is a mindset. It's an open-minded business value generator kind of mindset. And then now I'm going to answer the question about the role of the solutions architect. I think solutions architects, when they're doing their job right, they are business model designers, right? So a client comes to them with service scope, and then somehow that very often when a solutions architect is involved, it's because that scope is complex. And they need to think about what is the value proposition that we're offering with this particular set of services, tools, and capability processes, the people, processes, and tools. What are we trying to deliver with this? What is the best way of doing this? And then now we have a complex question. It's not just about plugging in this unit rate times this volume of words. Now we're talking about if you look at this path, you've got storage, you've got tokens, you've got risk, you can quantify all that stuff. You can also say, what is the buy build question? And then that's changing all the time too, where maybe it's easier to go get a platform, or you go buy individual tools, or you pay some team to spin up some vibe coded stuff. Each of the answers to this question depend on that value proposition, like what your risk tolerance is, who are your how big is your audience? And so I think the big question here is, how do you think about the component parts from a holistic point of view? Look at where quantification is required. And by quantification, I don't necessarily mean always precision, because sometimes accuracy is more important than precision, right? So I think if you, as long as you can bracket it into a realistic sort of guess as to what that value is, then you can sort of propose something that looks like a business that an executive can sign off on. And whether that's your own executives for your own company, they're trying to run a business, they have to sign off on it. It has to be something your team can actually do, like the resources can actually do this. So you're thinking about it from an ergonomic perspective and what are your resources and tools that you have, and what do they need to do this? And of course, the client needs to get what they want, and what you build for them needs to be directly enhancing the main reason why they're paying you to do this in the first place. You have to create more value for the client than it costs them to pay you to do this work. And I think the solutions designer is somebody who can look at this whole thing together in the big picture and look beyond sort of the standard price list and look deeper into why are they doing this? Why are they thinking about paying you a bunch of money to do something? And how can you make sure that what this group of people, tools, partners, vendors, freelancers, whatever the constellation of different capabilities is, how do we deliver that value to that person while everybody gets kind of their slice and gets paid fairly and is compensated and controlled appropriately? Governance is really critical in there too. It's like building businesses every single time you do a proposal. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny too. I think you're spot on about ultimately someone has to cut the check, right? Someone has to sign off, and they need to see the value in this. And oftentimes I've seen, and I've had to say to solutions people before, it's like, the Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park is like, we were too hell bent on saying, could we do this, that we didn't ask ourselves, should we do this? Because sometimes it is like, hey, this solves the problem. This is great. And it's like, all right, time out. It does. It solves the problem at the surface, but what does this mean for the greater overall solution? And what does this look like from the customer perspective of, yeah, it solves the problem, but then a year from now they're spending 3 times more, and they're going to come to us as like, what the hell happened? So it's like really thinking through the entire life cycle of your solution, like fast forwarding and saying, it's like, great, this solves it today. Does it solve it next month? Does it solve it next year? And what does the value prop look a year from now? Because that's got to be filtered into a lot of these proposals, is to say, like, yeah, this might stop the bleeding, but then it's probably going to kill you a year
Yeah.
later, so.
I think we see in our industry a lot of mythology, a lot of hype. It's almost like politics. It's where people are jumping to solutions rather than understanding the problem. that they're trying to face. So if they have an honest conversation about themselves, about what are they really trying to solve, what are their real needs? And if they don't have their real needs defined, if they haven't really thought through why they're doing this, what's the point? And will this solution candidate deliver to this result? And I came up with this notion that there's no such thing as a solution without a matching problem. So if we did build some amazing business models, but they just didn't fit what the client really wanted, or they could have been their own business model if somebody was willing to buy it. But you need the problem and you need the answer to that problem. So it's kind of like an equal sign that's implicit in the solutions kind of ecosystem. But I think overall, I think we're hitting on some really important sort of key notions of the why and the how or what should be derived from the how. The how or what are derived from the why. That's what I was trying to say. So the why is the central question. Why are you doing this? Why are you bothering to spend any of this money? What are you hoping to get from it?
I totally agree. And I got one more question for you, and it could be like it could just take us to the end of the hour, possibly, because it's a very thought-provoking question. And before I get there, I will say that Erik is a consultant, and what he's going to say here to answer this question, I'm sure if you were paying him, he could elaborate even more on. So don't give everything away here. But if you were building a modern solutions organization from scratch today, just starting today, what would you prioritize?
You mean, yeah, I think I've managed solutions architects throughout my life, and I think one of the defining characteristics of solutions architects are that they have a key focus on edge cases, and they'll look very, very closely at where the edges of the parameters are. What are the limits of those parameters? So let me just start with that. I'll also say, when we're talking about a modern solutions organization, I think about Halliburton as a model because they are an engineering firm. They used to be small, and they just kept on having problems presented to them. And then they came up with really good solutions for them, and then they scaled up those solutions. It's all about starting with the problem first, understanding what you're trying to solve. And if you're successful at delivering a result, you can replicate that. So, and I think going back to Moravia days, Moravia was a very solution-centric company. They're very focused on custom solutions that were 100% focused on not making the client come to them, but building exactly what that client needed in their particular world and their ecosystem. So I think if I also would say I love business model generation as a mindset, like Alex Osterwilder's book. Like I just have a picture in my head of the lean business model sort of in my head all the time. And I always think about the value proposition at the center. And on the left, you have what does it take to deliver that? And on the right, you have who's consuming that. You have prices in there and costs in there, but I think the real center has to be the value proposition. So for example, if I'm building a solutions organization, you start with why. What is the real problem? What is the real need that they're trying to fix? And then you back into that with the right capabilities. You don't over-engineer it because you can easily kind of build in too much, like buying a big software platform that you don't actually need. Because and there was a example of a client I was talking to once whose tech costs were like 3 times higher than their actual translation costs, just from connectors and stuff. And it was like they were paying for thousands of dollars of connector fees for an update that happened twice a year. So that's kind of like maybe go back to thinking about what is it that you're actually trying to solve first, and then provide those solutions. And I'm a firm believer that organizations right now that imagine themselves as solutions oriented, like modern solutions organizations, are going to be hunting for signal and willing to build things that map to that signal. And that's where being able to prioritize based on what that signal is telling you is the center thing. So if you're offering something that is declining in sort of business, then I think it's really important to start revisiting that fundamental what it is, the solution that you have was designed to meet a certain business need. It was very successful in the past. Is it still serving you for what your current future growth opportunities really are? That is the core of a solutions organization today.
Awesome. Erik, appreciate the time. How can people connect with you? How can they find you if they need your services or if they just want to chat? How do they get in contact with Erik?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm perfectly happy to connect there and start that conversation. You can also find, I actually made a little website for myself, erikvogt.com. Grabbed the URL when I was there, and what I tried to do is help people think through these things and get them what they do. And it's not too dissimilar to what Blackbird does, and I think this is why our partnership is such a natural fit. Is that Blackbird is thinking about orchestration as kind of a core sort of you ask better questions, and you can automate things, but it's not strictly speaking a workflow automation tool. You can do this to iterate solution candidates. You can monitor things. You can try different pathways for a particular solution and compare the results and see what works for you. It's an opportunity to dabble or touch things and make dissimilar systems work together more efficiently, which if you're copying and pasting from one system into another, this is a good time to maybe talk to you guys about what ways we can help avoid some of this toil, this kind of menial stuff. But I think and of course Blacklake is doing some really interesting stuff here too, which is cutting edge kind of contextual infrastructure, which is changing the way that you think about workflows and where you're storing things and where is value being added in that workflow. So I think all these things are really aligned with this conversation about what solutions design is all about. But yeah, anybody, I'm pretty happy to chat and brainstorm. Feel free to disagree with me. You can start an argument if you want. I'll be glad to entertain it.
Awesome. Yeah, listen, when I started this podcast, I always said it's not going to be a commercial for Blackbird, even though,
you're hosting it, right?
I said it's going to be like an 80s cartoon where it's like, you're watching a cartoon, but you're going to go out and buy the G.I. Joes and the Transformers but genuinely, yeah, Erik has been working with us with Blacklake, and it's awesome, and I'm excited to continue to work with you on Blacklake and where it can go. And yeah, you can find us blackbird.io. You can find Erik over on LinkedIn and on his website. And until next time, bird watchers, keep your eyes to the sky for more awesome stuff coming soon. Later.
See ya.